Hi, everybody. Welcome to Frank's Engaging Commentary Channel, entertaining commentary channel, whatever you want to dub it. I hope it's engaging. Frank's EC channel. We're going to talk about covenants today, or what people in the Christian world call the New Testament, the Old Testament, and what's the difference. Many people in the church world, and I'm going to play you 3 short video clips, even big time preachers are either ignorant of what the covenants are and how they work, or they're deceiving you. But millions believe some of the things that are going to be said. In these 3 short video clips, you're going to see 2 guys that get it wrong and 1 man that gets it right. And if you hang with me, we're going to dive into more information from the Bible. So if you want to know what the Bible says and not just what the preacher says, please watch the rest of this video.
The other problem is you don't know how to rightly divide the Bible. The New Testament is a new contract, which means you don't consider the Old Testament, which is the old contract. The old contract was a shadow of the new that was to come.
The old covenant in the Old Testament is based on rule keeping. The new covenant, though, is based on grace. The old covenant is based on rule, law.
When I first started studying Scripture and really getting into the things of God, one of the questions that I had was, what really is the difference between the New Testament and the Old Testament? After thinking about it for a long time, I thought, well, the New Testament is all about faith, and the Old Testament is all about works, just obeying the law. And then I realized, wait a second, the whole doctrine of faith, the just shall live by faith, that's from the Old Testament. There goes that theory. So I started thinking again, what really is the difference? Well, the New Testament is all about love and about loving your enemies, whereas the Old Testament's all about wrath. Then I realized that Exodus chapter 23 and Leviticus chapter 19 talks about those things, teaches us those things. Exodus chapter 23 talks about how when your enemy needs help, help him. Love your enemy. And Leviticus chapter 19, love your neighbor as yourself.
Well, if you made it this far, about 2 minutes and 18 seconds into the part covenants video, you got past the introduction. The first 2 minutes and 20 seconds, you learned something. If he didn't come to abolish the law, like old Creflo says, it's all a completely new covenant. Is it really? How do we understand this? Because this is what some people have been taught, and they think it's a brand new contract. Never has been seen before. They don't know covenants. If you made it this far, stay with me. We're going to dive into this. Let's start with Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. I'm reading from the Tree of Life version. Do not think that I am come to abolish the law or Torah or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Fulfill doesn't mean to do away with. It means to complete, to make it work properly, to show people how it works. So we're going to look at this concept of the new covenant, and we'll get to the idea that it's not technically a new covenant. Some people don't understand that. Verse 18 goes on to say here in Matthew chapter 5, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or jot shall pass away from the Torah, or the law, some translations will say, until all things come to pass. Some translations say all is fulfilled. Well, all hasn't come to pass. All hasn't been fulfilled, because when Yeshua, or Jesus as many of you call him, said that the Torah or the law speaks of him, it also speaks of end time events and things that will happen. So therefore, it can't be all done away with or completed. The new heaven and the new earth haven't been brought to pass yet. So when guys say we're under a brand new contract, they're either grossly ignorant or they're getting ready to scam you. Just think about that. That first part of that little short video clip, that one guy in particular doesn't mind asking for a tithe, if you've ever watched some of his videos. Well, one, he's not a Levite. Why does he deserve the tithe? He doesn't even understand the tithe, but he sure wants the money. He doesn't understand that the tithe is not money. We could do a whole video on what the tithe is. And the other guy, we're going to get into that. It's all just rule keeping. You have a wrong concept there, preacher. It's not all just rule keeping, because you're implying that if you keep the rules, somehow you're going to be saved. That's the language they like to use. If you study what Paul says in the book of Romans, you'll find out that's not the case. And that's what we're going to do. So I hope you hang in here with me as we deep dive into this subject about the new covenant, renewed covenant, about the old covenant, what's different, what's changed. And I know we're not going to cover everything here, maybe as good as I'd like to, but we're going to try. Well, on the subject of commands, let's see if it's all just rule keeping. What does John chapter 14, verse 15 teach? It says, if you love me, this is Yeshua, Jesus talking, you shall guard my commands, plural. We also see this in Exodus 20, verse 6. Who do you think wrote the 10 Commandments on the stones with his finger? It was Yeshua, if you haven't figured that out. This is also repeated in John 14:21 to 23, 1 John chapter 5, verse 2 and 3, and 2 John 1:6. Let's look at 2 John 1:6. 2 John 1:6 goes on to say, and this is the love that we walk according to his commands. This is the command that you have heard from the beginning, that you should walk in it. If it's all just a bunch of rule keeping, sounds like if you don't love him, you won't do his command, and his commands are not grievous. But what is this grace the guy talked about? As if grace is a license. In fact, the Apostle Paul was accused of this in his day. Romans chapter 6, verse 1. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? Verse 2, may it never be. How can we who are dead to sin still live in it? Yet people teach today with this cheap grace, what we call sloppy agape, that you can be baptized, shake the preacher's hands, say some sinner's prayer, and your life never changes. That's not grace. That's false grace. And a lot of these people teach that in their churches. You can live like you want, and you're still going to make heaven. Paul doesn't teach that. You've never read Romans 6, preacher. We've dealt with that. Now we're going to deal with this. Is it a totally new contract? Without getting too long, because that's a long subject. Luke 22, chapter 22, verse 20 reads, in that same way, he took the cup after the meal, saying, this is the cup, is the new covenant, or renewed covenant, depending on your translation, in my blood, which is poured out for you. When he said this, he's referring back to Zechariah chapter 9, verse 11. We're going to put that verse up on the screen because that's our launching point to dive into Jeremiah 31, Hebrews, and the renewed covenant. Well, we're trying to put the bow on this new covenant, renewed covenant thing. Here we go. Jeremiah chapter 31, starting at verse 31. Which is quoted by the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 8, chapter 10, and we'll look at some of the things that's actually changed in the covenant, but most of it has not. You got to read all of Jeremiah 30 and 31 and understand there are 7 conditions to the new covenant, at least in these 2 chapters. But the key verses that the writer of Hebrews quotes, we're going to read. Behold, the days are coming, it is declared by Adonai, when I will make a renewed covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. You notice it's with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Where's this Gentile church system in this? You better understand what Paul says in Romans 11 about being grafted in, and what he says in Ephesians, that you're brought into covenant with the commonwealth of Israel. You're not in something new called the Gentile church, universal church system. You don't understand. There's no covenant but between 3 parties here, Adonai, Israel, and Judah. You have to be brought into the covenant by one of the parties and be partakers of the covenant according to what he says, not what the church system teaches you, that you're something separate from national Israel. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand, for they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. You got to see all of Ezekiel 16 to understand that. That's why I said there's a lot in this whole new covenant thing that we're not going to have time to cover for the sake of time. Well, what's he saying in verse 33? But this is my covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days. It is declared by Adonai, I will put my law or Torah within them. I shall write it on their hearts, and I will be their Elohim or God, and they shall be my people. No longer will each one teach his neighbor, verse 34, and saying, Know Adonai, for they will all know me from the least to the greatest. It is declared of Adonai, I will forgive their iniquity and their sins I remember no more. Well, we still have teachers today. If we were fully under the new covenant, we wouldn't need to go up to hear any preacher. We would all know him from the least to the greatest. Paul talks about there are teachers, there are apostles, there are prophets for the perfecting of the saints. So obviously we still have teachers. Let's also look at something from Ezekiel chapter 16. But I shall remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth, and I shall establish an everlasting covenant with you. See, there's the whole key. And you shall remember your ways and be ashamed. Most people have not ashamed of their ways. So there's a lot more to say about this covenant and what it entails, but it's not something brand new. It's contingent upon the Abrahamic covenant, and upon that next covenant is the Mosaic covenant, and these covenants are stacked. That's called a suzeraini contract. They're amended but not done away with, just like we can amend the Constitution of the United States but not do away with it. What's the conclusion of the matter, you say, Frank? Well, what about sacrifices and all that stuff? Well, let's look at what the writer of Hebrews says. Chapter 13, verse 15. Through Yeshua, then let us continually offer up to Elohim our God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. So we do offer sacrifices today. It's not animals on an altar. It's the sacrifice, the praise, the thanksgiving of our lips to Elohim. See, Yeshua is now serving as the heavenly priest in the heavenly tabernacle. There is no earthly. That's Hebrews chapter 8. It goes on to say in Hebrews chapter 8 that if he were on the earth, he would not be a priest, but he is a priest in the heavenlies after the resurrection. This is called the Melchizedek priesthood. It's not on earth, it's in the heavenlies. And he officiates there in the heavenly tabernacle. There's no earthly tabernacle. That's an important thing. It doesn't mean there can't be one in the future. That's a whole another video on the Ezekiel temple. So he officiates in the heavenly tabernacle. Also, what else has changed as we look at Hebrews 10? Are we still supposed to not murder? Of course. Are we not supposed to lie, bear false witness? Of course. We're to love him and keep his commandments. Are we still supposed to keep the Sabbath from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday? Yes. Well, Frank, we don't have all these offerings that they offered. No, but you can offer the sacrifice of praise of your lips. So we do function through a heavenly tabernacle, not the earthly. That's the whole point of the writer of Hebrews. There's too much for me to cover in detail, but read Hebrews 8, 9, and 10 carefully. Then if you have a question, write it in the comments, and I'll hopefully make a video and answer those questions. I hope I've covered the subject well. I didn't want the video to get too long. I could have really deep dived. So you see, yes, we are still under the covenant from Abraham through Mount Sinai. The blood of that covenant is better than bulls or goats. That's another thing that the book of Hebrews says. We've showed you in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 11, where he offers himself up, and his blood is superior to the blood of bulls and goats. Shalom on your home till we see you in the next